Hello, welcome. Thanks for getting up on a Saturday morning. Really nice to see everyone here. My name's Bray. I'll be chairing this session, and I run Random Acts for Channel 4. That's my day job, and I also do a bit of producing. I had a film here a couple of years ago called Beyond Clueless, so it's really wonderful to be back. The way the session's going to work is I'm going to bring up a guest. We're going to talk about how they got started in the industry. We're going to show a little bit of their work, and then they're going to pop back down. At the end, we're bringing everybody back for questions. So do feel free to jump in if you've got anything particularly urgent, but otherwise, the end is when we're going to sort of have that chance for everyone to sort of just dive in. So my first guest this morning is Eleanor McDowall. Come on up, Ellie.
I'm on Graham Norton, it's exciting.
Well, yeah, I wish I could live up to Graham Norton. So Ellie is, well, all-round amazing. She works as a radio producer at Falling Tree. They do Shortcuts with Josie Long for Radio 4. How many series have you guys done now?
We're making series 12 at the moment.
Amazing.
So we're sort of in like bad late-season Frasier kind of series.
And then Ellie also runs something called Radio Atlas, which we're going to be talking about a little bit more in a moment. But yeah, Ellie, could you just sort of like expand a little bit more on what you do in, I guess in a kind of a nuts and bolts way would be nice. Like, do you get up every morning, go to an office? Are you freelance? How does it all work?
So I'm not freelance. So I work with Falling Tree Productions, which is an independent radio production company. But in the UK, sort of making radio generally, the only person you're making it for is the BBC. So you're either like let in the building or you're not. We're not let in the building. So I work from home. Mainly, and kind of get up and do, it can really vary doing radio stuff. Sometimes you have stuff that makes you kind of existentially question what you're doing, where you spend like the entire morning Googling, trying to find whimsical short documentary stories, and your search history becomes just an absolute horror. Or I'll spend a lot of time kind of editing, cutting things together, myself going out to interview people, going into studios. So really like, yeah, kind of varied job, which is why I like it, I think.
And was radio always your passion? Did you have like radio on in the house when you were growing up? I mean, Radio 1 was probably like my only experience of radio. It's not a big thing.
Yeah, no, not at all. I think like my perception of Radio 4 was running out of rooms when the Archers theme tune would start, which is, yeah, the only sort of overriding memory. I was really interested in music radio when I was a teenager, and I used to listen to John Kennedy on XFM and think that that's what I wanted to do, that I wanted to produce and get lots of free records and not have to do the talking bit. And I sort of fell into this really clumsily doing speech radio, but then just completely fell in love with it, I think, because it's just about, well, I guess with all doc stuff, it's about curiosity and being interested in an idea and being lucky enough to get to immerse yourself and pursue it.
And what led you specifically to docs in radio rather than, producing Play for Today or whatever?
Oh, because I hate drama on the radio. It's awful. It's not awful. It's very good. That's nice. But yeah, I think I thought true life is, as lots of people here probably do, true life is much more interesting than fiction to me, I think. So I just fell for it.
And paint me a little picture. Teenage Ellie, were you very kind of go-getting and you knew you wanted to go straight to the top and succeed? Or?
No, I was a disaster. I think I've sort of fallen from thing to thing and been very lucky where I've fallen. But I think always, the overriding thing is being curious and finding a space where you get to immerse yourself in the ideas that you think are interesting. And I think you could do that within any format. I mean, I'm sure, in docs you can migrate from kind of films to VR to radio, whatever tells the story the best.
And tell me about Radio Atlas, because that's a real passion project, isn't it? What is Radio Atlas?
It's niche. So I started this project because in radio, for some reason, no one seems to care that you can't hear anything that's being made in languages other than that you don't speak. And it's incredibly difficult to access stuff, but some of the most exciting, innovative, provocative documentary work being made at the moment is being made not in English. So I started this project where I make subtitled films out of audio documentaries. And in fact, there's one screening tomorrow at 6 o'clock, which is Denmark's most popular podcast, this wonderful show called Third Ear, who I think in Copenhagen, they sell out 1,000-seat cinemas in an hour with people who want to hear something that's going to be on the internet the next day.
Oh,
but it's
my
like,
goodness.
it's really, really good.
So you guys should all come along and listen to that tomorrow.
Yes. But yeah, it's Radio Atlas is trying to find a way to kind of translate things without getting in the way and to keep it true to audio. So yeah, minimal pictures.
And
Always.
it's probably easier to actually sample a little bit of that than describe. So I think
We've not got a clip.
We've not got a clip from radio.
You have to sample it tomorrow at 6.
Have we?
I think.
What was the clip that we?
Because we've got something from radio that I make. So I've got one of my
lovely.
documentaries, I'm afraid.
Okay. Do not apologise. We have a wonderful clip for you. Ellie, do you want to say a bit about it?
Yeah. So this is the sort of stuff that I make in my day job at Falling Tree. It's from a documentary that I made called A Dancer Dies Twice. It's all about ballet dancers' last dances. And the clip that you're going to hear, it's sort of built around a number of dance sequences where you kind of cut between dancers in a ballet studio and sort of people who've now retired. So this is, building up to the last minutes of that before you hear about someone's career ending.
Okay, lovely. Let's have a listen.
That's the nose of my own knee.
Literally made my toes curl thinking about toenails coming off. So we've been talking about the what of what you do, but to address the first word in the title of this session, the how. How did you get your first job?
My first job was sort of just knocking on doors, and I just wrote to the people who were making the things that I liked and said, can I have a chat with you and a cup of tea and talk about my terrible ideas? And I went, and they were very open, and we talked about my terrible ideas, and they was like, you should think of better ones, and sort of worked in that way. And that was very useful. But I was doing a master's in radio production, which I would absolutely say you don't need to do at all. But during that, I had this course assignment where I had to write a pitch for a Radio 4 documentary, and I sent it to the head of a production company that I really liked, and he said, let's just chuck it in and see what happens. And that got commissioned, and then terrifyingly, sort of 6 months later, I was on my own in Austria with a microphone trying to make something when I'd never even made something at 30 minutes before.
What was the when you were sending out those sort of letters to harass people? What was your kind of hit rate for even getting a reply?
It was quite good, actually. I think radio, it's very, very open and friendly as long as you're targeted and actually know what now on the other side of it, when I'm getting letters, it's the kind of, dear sir or madam, I've always been interested in radio in general, that you're like, let's never speak again. But if it's kind of focused and they, know one of the programs that you work on, and it's kind of an engaged listener's perspective, I think, regardless of experience, I think people are very open, because it's a space that's very hungry for ideas and it's hungry for new people.
And are there any other sort of big mistakes people make other than, dear sir, I like radio?
The most terrifying one is when someone posts you a massive script with a CD and say, I've made this radio documentary, do you want to put it on Radio 4? Mm-hmm. Those are frightening. So I think very, very long things are quite unhelpful. And most good ideas, if you're going to sell it, I think if you can sum it up in 1 or 2 sentences, it probably means your idea is quite strong if it's got a kind of clarity, because that's the pitching process that you'll go through. So I think you should think about that when you're contacting a company, and just say in a couple of sentences rather than see attached my PDF.
I would 100% echo that from the film world, when people sort of send you a script out of nowhere, or even a 20-page treatment, instead of being able to condense the idea down into a line. It's sort of so important. Well,
and also, because I don't think it's malicious, I think it's just practical, that when you see something like that, you think, I'm going to have to set aside time to properly read all of this and send really detailed notes and feedback. And if someone asks you a simple question like, would you like a cup of tea? That's much clearly, quicker to respond to.
It also can be a legal thing. If you've sent your script in to somebody and then you were already working on something very similar, then that's how those sorts of...
Yeah, and you don't want to say it.
You don't want to accidentally steal someone's idea.
Yeah. No, you always want to do it on purpose.
And that's pitching ideas. So that's pitching yourself. How would you go about that? Have you had to do a lot of that, or...?
In what context? You mean sort of trying to get work with a company, or...?
Yeah, how did you come to work at Falling Tree?
I did, I just had it, it's quite, I think maybe radio was more informal in terms of its access than film, perhaps. I think generally I just had chats with people and cups of tea and tried not to say anything awful. I went for one meeting where I ended up getting a job, actually, where within the first 5 minutes I insulted a massive venture that they'd gone in, because I hadn't realised they were associated with. So always research what they ran.
I did that. I slagged off Pride and Prejudice to one of the executives who'd made it when I was interviewing to be her assistant.
But maybe that's really like ballsy and kind of on it. Like, I'll always be honest with you.
Didn't get the job.
Oh, okay, fair enough. Yeah, don't do that.
I think we need to sort of wrap up with Ellie now, but I just want to sort of close out by... The title of this session contains this massive assumption, how to break into the industry. The idea is that we have broken into the industry. Did you have a moment where you felt like that was true? At what point does that come where you go, oh yeah, actually I'm doing this?
I think the most excited... Well, it was an absolute thrill the first time I sent an invoice for work, and I remember bumping up my invoice number so it looked like it wasn't a big deal. So I was on like 007... So, yeah. But when I was making enough to, like, just be living off it was the moment where I sort of felt I'd really achieved something. That's a very low bar of entry, isn't it? Like, just excited to make a living.
Professional.
Yeah,
that's
to be professional. Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Ellie. Anyone with questions for Ellie, she'll be back at the end.
Sure.
Thank you. And now please join me in welcoming Wessie and Camille, who are a bit of an exclusive, this one actually. We've got a short that they've made that is having its world premiere in the festival, and we're going to also screen it for you now. It's about 3 minutes long. Let's set it up at, 4 minutes?
Five.
Oh my goodness, 5. So we better crack on, or we're going to use up all of your time on the short. But do you want to just set up the short a bit for everybody, and then we'll roll the film?
Sure. Before this film got commissioned, I didn't actually think of myself as a filmmaker. I'm a writer, principally. But Camille is a filmmaker, and I've helped her out on projects that she's been working on, and we ended up, I just think we felt like we worked together quite well, didn't we?
Yeah.
And then this time round we were developing another idea, and then we decided, well, let's direct it together. And so that's what we did, and it was a really fun process. And interesting what you were saying beforehand about making the idea concise, because when we were hatching this idea, it was all about emotional conflict, and it was fairly complex, and as we went through the pitching process, it ended up just being, this is a film about love. And I think that's probably for the best in the end, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Because all those old ideas stayed in there, but just, it was more focused. So yeah, it's a film about love.
Brilliant. Let's play that film for one of the first times for public eyes. Ooh. So maybe you could talk a bit in practical terms, how this film came about, the funding, as well as the idea, where you put it together, who you got involved, all of that kind of thing.
I think we had started discussing the premise of the idea and putting it in pitch form. I had a really small kind of like rainy studio in Bermondsey at the time, and we spent a couple of days just trying to like hash out the idea, what it was we were trying to do. And to be honest, I think we just spoke about it a lot. I think, going out and meeting friends and so on, we're just constantly talking about this thing that we're really passionate about and really excited about making. And it was through that we actually started to talk to Jen Byrne, who was the commissioner at Dazed for this, and she was like, oh, there's this thing for random acts, stop, play, record, something that we were completely unaware of. And it was very much just through speaking about our idea in a really excited way, and she showed us what it was about and kind of told us about the fact that they were giving out grants. I think they do it every year for filmmakers between, 16 and 25?
16 and 24, I think,
24, yeah. And so we applied for that, and we were lucky enough to get it, and then very much kind of took it from there, really.
And when you pitch a film, have you had a lot of experience of doing that? I'm thinking about what we were talking about with Ellie, emailing off people one line versus whole big scripts and treatments.
It's so funny how similar it is, because as I say, I come from a slightly different background, but when writing pitches for like freelance journalism is exactly the same, and Camille has written a lot of, because we used to talk about your pitches that you were doing for your films.
When Wessie and I first started working together, he would do a lot of the writing, because I'm much more visual. And he's incredible with words, and so that's when we decided to kind of team up and put our skills together, really. And so yeah, at the start, he was actually helping me write my pitches, and I would just do the images and be like, this is kind of what I want to say. But yeah, no, I mean, now I'm constantly pitching, like I work in commercial film while making documentaries at the same time, and it's very much like constant process of just like distilling your ideas in like a 12-page PDF and like using images and sounding like fun and not too formal again, and making something that's really digestible.
Yeah. I think that was a big one. Even our first pitches were too formal, and then I can't remember who it was, but we got advice from somebody. I think like one thing that I've always thought is that, and this came out I think of Ellie's talk as well, is that like when you're just in any of these industries, when you're just starting out, like any kind of advice from anybody who's been involved in it is just like worth its weight in, well, it's weightless, isn't it? But it's golden. So, yeah, and this fascinating bit of advice that this thing that we realized is that to make our pitches seem human in a way, to be engaging rather than to be being too formal and saying, because I think there is a tendency to, you want to, especially if you're starting out, you want to make it seem as if you're serious. Do you know what I mean? You may be feeling insecure about that, whereas actually, I think people are more interested in reading pitches that are kind of honest and engaging.
I get a lot of sort of word salad of the kind of, dear Ms. Catherine Bray, might I kindly request the pleasure of your attention on the enclosed, so you can tell that person is nervous and hasn't done a lot of that, because the most relaxed pitches tend to come from those kind of commercial agencies going, hey, I want to make a film about a rainbow, what do you think?
Yeah.
I think I've written that exact email.
Yeah.
Oh, that was from you. And your commercial background, how did that come about?
Well, so I studied fine art, didn't study film. I really wanted to get into like music videos. Well, basically when I finished studying fine art, I was like, cool, I'm not going to make any money making art right now. So I got interested in commercial film, and I actually met somebody at a bar, and I was like, I make films. I didn't at the time. And he's like, cool, well, I've got this new artist who happened to work in A&R, and he gave me, I think, like £1,000 to make a video. And I just gave it my everything. I worked so hard on it. I made it all myself. I kind of was learning how to use After Effects and all this stuff. And weirdly, luckily the track was great. And very quickly, like, it got picked up by a couple of fashion clients. And then I just started meeting creative directors. And then before I knew it, it was kind of, I think I got lucky and I got momentum. But it was very much. It was very much also just like working really fucking hard. Sorry.
I think it's fine. I think we're a 16+ session.
We're informal, right? So that was kind of my first break into the industry, was just that one video that got a little bit of traction. And then
came about as the result of a little bit of a blag, is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, I was confident. I was trying to exude confidence.
That can be a tricky one. I mean, I don't know what you think about that, Wessie, but there's sort of the tendency on some people's part to really downplay themselves, and you could actually end up passing over as a commissioner somebody really talented because they don't give the impression that they think that they can do the work. And then on the other hand, there's a lot of sort of blaggers in the industry. I mean, I was literally sitting in the City in Sheffield yesterday, and someone came over and said, I'm actually the head of £1 million concern, and I'm looking for somebody who can translate Chinese for free. I was like, you're obviously not a head of £1 million concern if you're asking for someone to translate for free. So I guess it's always about finding that line between the sort of overconfidence versus underselling yourself. I don't know if that's something that you could speak to.
One thing I would say is that, I don't know if this is entirely answering your question, but one thing I've noticed, not just from my experience, but from just all the conversations I've had in this area, is that just whatever you do, be prepared to fail and to be knocked back, but just don't let it get to you. I mean, I just, like, I know artists, for instance, who are in their 60s, who are still have to have that attitude when they submit things, because that's just the nature of it, isn't it? In terms of blagging it, I've never been very good at that. I've often told myself I should do it more, but I have to say, if if it's helpful, then I haven't been able to do it anyway.
But maybe that's one reason that your partnership works, because you have slightly different approaches to that. Collaboration also seems to be a really important thing for you guys. How did you actually sort of, meet and then get to the point where you decided that this friendship should actually be a sort of a professional thing as well?
Well, I'm going to use this opportunity to say that Camille made a documentary, and it was a wonderful documentary, so I just wanted to mention that, because it's a great film. And Camille made a film about the Navajo in northern Arizona, a documentary, and that was very much your first. That was a long project, wasn't it? A labour of love. And we met whilst you were working on that film, didn't we?
Yeah.
And you said, well, there's these little bits of the film which are unresolved. I don't really feel like. I feel like there's aspects of the film that I'm stuck with, and then I got involved and started. I suppose I was just sort of a critical kind of, just putting sort of critical input into the process, giving my thoughts.
Yeah,
and then
I think the thing is,
there.
when you work on, particularly with documentary, we were talking about this earlier with Dominic, who you'll meet later, but it's a very kind of like lonely process, and you can spend a lot of time by yourself, and it can be quite difficult to like resolve things in your own mind. It's like as soon as you say things out loud, all of a sudden they can make sense to you. And I think when I met Wessie, which was actually outside of a pub,
I was wearing flip-flops.
he was wearing flip-flops. I just kind of thought that our minds kind of just clicked. And I think it's really rare to find that, and I think we both really cherish it because, I think we got really lucky. And then having, it was like 2 or 3 years that we were kind of vaguely working together until this came up, and we were just like, okay, let's run with it. And I think we're both really pleased with the result.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it will continue, we hope.
Great. I think we're out of time on that session, other than just wanting to ask you the same thing that I asked Ellie. At what point did you realise that you had kind of broken into the industry? What was your benchmark for that? Or are you yet to...
I think, similarly to Ellie, I do think the fact that I can like pay my rent and live a fairly comfortable life, and also fund like personal documentary projects from commercial work, really made me feel like I had in a way, but no, I haven't. There's still, every time you get to a point where you feel like, I feel like I reached a goal, and then now my goal posts have moved like 7 steps higher. So I don't feel like I'm necessarily there yet. I probably never will. I hope I never do, because then I'll probably stop working as hard.
Well, the film is really wonderful for me because, as I say, I've come at this from a different background, and so I'm still just I love film, obviously, but I'm still just treating everything that happens here as a bonus, if you know what I mean. And that's really great for me. So at this stage, I'm not aware that I've broken anything.
Lovely. Thanks, guys. And now please welcome Dominic. Hey, Dominic. So let's start, as ever, with who you are and what you do.
So my name's Dominic, and I'm a filmmaker. So I'm a self-shooting director, specifically in documentary. So I'm in the right place. And
roughly how long have you been doing that for?
So I graduated from my master's in film 3 years ago. So I've been kind of making my own things ever since.
And you're on the BBC Director Scheme, is that right?
Yep. So last year I applied for a scheme called the New Director Scheme for the BBC, and I got in January. So I've been put with a production company called Minnow Films. So I've been with them for the last 6 months.
Cool. Tell me a bit more about that scheme. How many of you are there, for example?
So there are 6 new directors, specifically within the genre of documentary, and we're each doing quite different things. I think there are about half of us who are making personal films, like me. And so over this course of the whole program, they put you with a mentor. So mine is Morgan Matthews at Minnow, which is brilliant. He's fantastic. And during this scheme, the BBC kind of provide these masterclasses every couple of weeks. So they're specifically on like editing, has been on 1 week, interviewing, ethics, duty of care, so kind of covering the whole range of issues that you'd face as a filmmaker. So it's a really good scheme because I think often it can be quite daunting to kind of sustain a relationship with a commissioner, but I feel like it's been a really kind of safe, open space. And for me, I've been kind of filming and editing pretty much ever since I started on the scheme. So for me, these masterclasses have been really useful because they've actually been kind of real-time problems. And I felt like at each session, the commissioners are there, so you can be really honest about what you're going through. And they're honest too. I mean, most of them are directors themselves or have been, so they've gone through every possible problem that you could think of encountering.
And paint me a picture of teenage Dominic. Did you know you wanted to go into the arts or directing specifically?
I thought I wanted to be a journalist, actually. So I studied French and English literature, and I did a master's in it as well. And then I was convinced that I wanted to be a writer. And then I just suddenly decided, I don't know, something happened. I was watching, I don't know if anyone has seen any Ross McElwee films. I watched Time Indefinite, and I was like, oh my God, I want to do this. This is way cooler. And I just kind of just blitzed through loads of films, documentaries, and then I just no, I want to do this. And I then decided to go to film school. So I did a course in ethnographic and documentary filmmaking, and things just started to happen from that point onwards. I've just kind of, I don't know, I'm really unsure about a lot of things in my life, but this is one thing that I'm really certain about. It just feels right, so.
I think for anyone keeping track, that's 3 masters that people have said that they didn't need to do.
I needed to do mine. Yeah.
Maybe Simran will bring the alternate view at the end.
Yeah. Balance us out.
Let's talk about the project that we're going to show a little bit from. Very personal project.
Yep. So I've been making this film. Well, I did make this film. I literally finished 6 days ago. And my editor, James, is here. And also Commissioner, Emma, is here. So I finished it 5-6 days ago. It's a film that I've been making for 2 years on my grandparents, because my granddad suffers from vascular dementia. So he's had a kind of really tumultuous journey over the last 2 years. He kind of split up with my grandmother. He was sectioned under my care, because I looked after him, and then he was sectioned. And then he went to various care homes and various family members, and then he's kind of had a miraculous turnaround. So I'm really close to my granddad. He kind of, I don't really know my own dad, so for me he was such a father figure throughout my life. So for me, making this film was kind of about gaining a sense of control over the situation, but then also just kind of documenting something awful that was happening to him. So yeah.
What are we about to see in this clip specifically?
So it's quite difficult to find something, so I thought I would just show you a clip. I think it begins when he was first sectioned, and then my grandmother coming back, because they temporarily were separated. So it's her coming back. She was away in Cyprus, and then she kind of came back to visit him. So I think it's around that time, I think.
Can we have Dominic's clip, please? So that must have been really tough.
Yeah.
I guess there's a sort of broader question there about how much a career in documentary takes out of you personally. You've taken the route where you're kind of very much present in your work. Is that something that you always thought would happen, or?
Definitely. I think the films I'm interested in, and I think the films that I want to continue to make, kind of always have that relationship between me and the person I'm filming. I think I'd find it impossible to make something where you're pretending that you're not there and that you haven't built up a relationship with them. I mean, and it obviously has its disadvantages because it's really stressful, but I think that's the only way I can make things. I couldn't just have these kind of self-contained answers where you pretend you're not there with these people. And I want to make films where I kind of do build up a relationship with someone over a period of time. So I think for me, it's the only way I can think about making something.
And so that's sort of the what of what you do, the how. You're on the BBC Directors Scheme.
Yep.
Was that something where you needed a portfolio of work to begin with in order to apply, or?
Well, I think actually out of the 6 directors, I think I've probably got. I think I'm the youngest, and I've got probably the least amount of experience. I've made 3. I'm making my 3rd film for The Guardian at the moment, and I've made a film for the British Council, and obviously I went to film school not too long ago. So I did have work to show, But I spent a lot of time on the application, a lot of time. And the interview was probably one of the toughest interviews I've had. I mean, there were 3 people there. There were 900 people who applied, and then 14 of us got an interview, and then 6 of us were on the scheme. And yeah, that was incredible.
Congratulations.
Thank you. No, it was incredibly intense, but I've since seen one of the commissioners who took it, who I just thought didn't like me at all. I thought he was just firing questions and not smiling and just being quite tough. And I've since seen him, and he said, "Do you know what? You were really well prepared. You probably had the least experience, but you were one of the most prepared." So I think I am a really hard worker, like Camille said, and like everyone else probably on this panel. But yeah, I think you just got to be determined, and I think if you really, really do put in the effort and you really stay focused, I think, like a lot of people have also pointed, you can be quite broad and you can lack focus, but if you really hone in on exactly what it is that you're trying to achieve, and being really specific, I think it's a lot easier for someone else to reciprocate and to kind of understand what you want rather than being quite broad about things. So yeah, I think that's being really specific.
Probably nonsense, but I wonder whether being a documentarian and being used to sort of really scrutinising how people come across on camera helps you with your interview technique.
I don't know, I think I'd be awful if I was filmed really bad.
We're live casting this.
No, I'm really nervous. No. Yeah, definitely. I think often I used to, especially when there are several people in a shot, I used to go in and think, fuck, I need to get this. There's so many things to capture. And I'd try and film everything, and I'd come back and look at the rushes, and they would just be completely lacking in focus, because in your quest to get everything, you've actually got nothing. Mm-hmm. So I think that starting off a scene or going in to shoot something and having a really specific idea of the thing, even if it's 5% of everything that's going on, really concentrate on that 5% and then make it 100%. Because then you've actually got something, and then the scene's got focus. So, and I think it's in relation to interviewing, it's exactly the same. I think really be specific with an issue. Have a think about what this person represents, what their character is, and where they fit in within the story as a whole. And then you don't have to cover everything about their life, but it sounds quite callous to say, but they do serve a purpose within the story. So make sure that you remain focused, mm-hmm. and make the best out of them within the film. So yeah, my biggest thing I'd say is focus. Definitely.
Specificity is coming up over and over again with this, isn't it? Whether it's, dear sir, I want a job in the media, or
definitely.
In terms of the technique of your work.
Definitely, because I think, everyone has a job, and a commissioner wants to make a good film, and I think, so they want specificity as well. I think they want, like a couple of other people have mentioned, they want to know that you know what you're doing and that you're not being too broad, and that you just have a clear idea. Because it's easier to sell, it's easier for people to understand, and it's easier for people to engage with. So I think it's kind of like that for everyone at every different level, really.
I think it can be quite a challenging thing to hear, though, because there's also that sort of, I know when I was starting out, I knew that I wanted to do something in the arts, but actually I probably was one of those people saying, I want to work in the media, I don't know what I want to do. I suppose it's about when you're talking to the person who works in radio, you absolutely want to work in radio and have a very specific idea of the type of radio that you want to work in. And sort of, I don't know, I guess it's around shaping that to the situation that you find yourself in without becoming some mad multitasker who says they'll do everything.
Yeah. Well, I'm a self-shooter, so you kind of have to do everything. And it's annoying because you're never going to be brilliant at one thing, because you're having to do sound, lighting, concentrate on the character. But, you can only do your best. And I think we spoke about this earlier, but I do think, especially when you're starting out, and I filmed a lot of this predominantly just myself, I just didn't really know what was going to happen with the film. But I think...
What is going to happen with the film next?
So the film's actually for BBC One, so it should be out within this summer, and it screened yesterday here, so... That's kind of the film's journey. But I think it can be daunting to have to do everything yourself, because you're never, like I just said, I think you're not going to do it particularly well because you're kind of having to do everything. So I think just don't get too panicked about it being really professional, and don't get panicked about budget or the camera quality, but like kind of really think about what is close to you, because no matter how big the crew could be or what kind of amazing equipment you could have, no one can take that away from you. So really think about your relationship to things that are really important to you, because that's your story and that's something that only you can do, and that's your biggest asset starting out. No one can do more than that. So I think just don't get worried and don't get bogged down about things that are just out of your control, but really think about what you've got to give.
So the personal approach. I've got to wrap up with you now, but I will just say, did you have that moment of I've arrived? Was it playing a film at Sheffield? I don't know.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah, I think it's, weirdly enough, I think it was getting onto the scheme, actually, because I thought the interview was really intense. So when I found out I got it, yeah, it's probably then. Yeah, probably then.
Lovely. Thanks so much, Dominic.
Thank you.
And now please join me in welcoming our final guest before we do our Q&A session, Simran Khan.
Oh, wow. Just thought I'd bring this trail of clothes. Also, these, you can't really tell, but wearing these things is so weird. I do feel like I'm in Star Trek.
So we first met at Sheffield. I can't remember what year it was, but years and years ago.
2013.
It was the other way around. Simran was interviewing me for, what was...
You know what? It's actually it's a cute story now that we're here together. But I was on the DocFest youth jury several years ago. And I sort of flicked through the delegates book and, like an absolute nerd, highlighted everybody who I wanted to meet. And Catherine was one of them. She was Film 4 at the time, and I thought, that'd be a good person to meet. And I think I made up some excuse that I was going to interview her for the youth jury blog or something, just so I could blag an introduction and legitimize it. And then afterwards, I sort of did this little mini interview, and it did go up. I don't think anyone ever read it. And then, we kind of kept in touch.
Yeah, so since then, Simran's gone from strength to strength, using those blagging skills to scale the heights of journalism. Now does a column in The Observer and programmer for McDowall Test Fest. Such a tongue twister, that. And all manner of other wonderful stuff. Do you want to sort of give people a bit of an overview of where you are now?
Sure. So primarily I'm a journalist. So my sort of main job is that I'm a film critic at The Observer. But I also write about lots of other different things for other publications. And I do a lot of kind of events-based work. So hosting a lot of Q&As, facilitating workshops with students. And then I also do some researcher work as well. So, it's true what they say about millennials. We're also multi-hyphenates.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, your career, in that you do have just all of these different strings to your bow. So taking it in a completely different direction from the specificity we've been talking about so far, this idea that you can do lots and lots of different things, which is something that I have certainly found in my own career as well. Just sort of doing a bit of everything is something that really appeals to me.
I think it's probably... The reason for that is two things. One, I have quite a hyperactive brain. I like to do lots of different things at once, and it means that I can't procrastinate if the only thing I can procrastinate on is another project. And also the other thing is just being freelance. So I kind of started to do some freelance stuff while I was still at university, and then I kind of had built up enough work to keep doing it when I finished. But as anybody who is a freelancer will know, you have to do loads of different things to kind of spin a lot of plates to keep everything going. So I think it was sort of born out of necessity, really.
And I think we racked our brains to think how you clip a piece of journalism, and we've come up with a bit of Radio 4, haven't we?
Yeah, so Catherine asked me for a clip, but obviously I don't make films, and I sort of said, is it all right if I don't show a clip? And she suggested that we have some broadcasts instead. So here is me reviewing a film on the radio.
We could play that
I
one.
just think it is the most beautiful, piercing film I've seen in years. It's played by 3 different actors, but the kind of physicality and the sensibilities of these 3 different actors is so astonishingly consistent. And actually, I read in an interview with Bray Jenkins that none of the different actors interacted with each other during the shoot, and they didn't see any footage of each other's dailies. So that's all in the script, it's all in the performances, and it's all in Barry Jenkins as a director, kind of having that authorial control over those three actors. And you have all these kind of wide vistas. And Chiron, the main character, he's sort of isolated in all these different frames. And there's lots of very striking images. There's a really gorgeous scene of Chiron's mentor, a drug dealer named Juan, who's played by Mahershala Ali. And he is teaching him how to swim. And
that's the key sort of motif, really, isn't it, that runs all the way through this idea?
Exactly. It's sort of who teaches us how to sink or swim, how to survive. But this scene is really extraordinary because the camera is sort of put at water level, so you're never quite sure whether he's swimming or drowning. You've got this sort of like roiling kind of skies, and I've watched the film I think 3 times now, and every time it gets to that bit, I'm just frozen in awe of it.
So with Francine Stock talking about Moonlight.
Yes, I should have said that I was talking about Moonlight, although you probably guessed it from hearing the clip. It's also really embarrassing to hear my own voice like that. But.
So that you're a bit of a wild card in our lineup in that it is journalism rather than filmmaking, but I think there's sort of such a lot about a journalistic arts career that also applies to filmmaking, and obviously documentary has overlap with that sphere as well. Take us back a bit. What was teenage Simran like? Did you know you wanted to work in the arts?
Yeah, kind of. I always thought I would be a political journalist, actually, and I was sort of toying between maybe studying politics when I went to university, and in the end I ended up doing English. And I really liked movies, but I didn't really think I would be that kind of a journalist. And I guess I just sort of started doing it as a hobby, and then somehow managed to parlay it into a career. I think it was a combination of luck and meeting lots of interesting people, and them seeing that I really was quite keen. But yeah, I knew I wanted to be a journalist, but not necessarily an arts journalist.
And we've talked a little bit about sort of how you handle rejection as a filmmaker. I think for a journalist, because you're producing sort of more individual pieces of work, however many articles a month, it's something that you probably have to handle even more often than filmmakers do. Do you have any sort of personal tips for
dealing with rejection? It hurts every time. No, I think, yeah, of course, if you're pitching things as a journalist, you're going to have to steel yourself for rejections. You have to follow people up even when you don't want to. It can be kind of, it can feel like you're badgering people, but actually it's quite productive. And often people just don't reply because they're getting so many emails a day. Obviously don't hound someone. But I guess in terms of rejection, it's kind of interesting because we're talking about how you're able to transition from sort of doing something a little bit into making a living from it, or being taken seriously. And I remember I had been freelancing a little bit, but I was certainly not making a living from it. And I'd applied for some internships. I think I applied for one with BAFTA, and I got down to the final 2, and they basically said to me, "You're really great, you'd be great for this role, but you seem like you're doing fine already." And I really wasn't. I really would have quite liked that job. And it's fine now, all's well that ends well. But I just think the sort of lesson that I want to impart from that is, I think in this industry, unfortunately, it is a lot about how you appear and how you look. And if you kind of come across as confident and like you know what you're doing, or you're sort of moving in the right circles, I think you can not sort of not scam your way into getting the job you want, but I think that a lot of it is based on appearances more than you'd like, but you have to actually do the work, and I think you can only get so far by just trading on the appearance. I don't know. What do you think about that, Catherine?
Yeah, no, I agree with all of that, and
do you kind of know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean, and you've actually made me realise that the dreaded word networking hasn't actually come up yet, even though this is a session on how to break into the industry. I feel like networking is such a sort of maligned word that conjures images of overly confident people in,
handing out business cards,
shoulder suits, handing out business cards to people who don't want them. But actually, if you think about it as doing exactly what the kind of thing that you did when we met, of just sort of saying to people, "Oh, hi, could we meet and go for a talk?" It's incredibly
it's kind of like
useful.
What Ellie was saying about like emailing people for a coffee. I just at that time I knew I was going to be at a place where the people were there, so I was just really extra and just tried to meet up with them in person.
There is something horrifying about people who say, oh yeah, no, I'm not going to the festival to see films, I'm going to network. But actually, that doesn't have to be a horrifying thing. That's just making connections and being sociable.
Yeah, I think like people can smell it from a mile off if you're being fake and like you're just trying to talk to them because you want something. But of course, like in an environment like a festival, there's lots of interesting people kind of milling about. So you don't know who you're going to talk to, who's going to be interesting.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, one of my, I run a small independent production company aside from my main job, and one of the sort of co-directors of that company I know because they said something cheeky to me on Twitter. And like that whole kind of professional relationship has grown out of that. So I suppose it doesn't even have to be that you reach out and are particularly polite to people all the time, although that's probably normally a good idea.
Yeah, I think it's more about making a genuine impression on someone or making a connection with them.
I'm going to ask you the when you realised you'd broken into the industry question, and then let's get everybody back for a Q&A session.
I don't know if I feel I have.
Oh my goodness, Simran, you've got a column in The Observer, and you're a journalist. That's the high watermark.
Well, I mean, okay, when you put it like that, it's quite nice. But I do think I don't know. You're always waiting for the bottom to fall out. I think if you're freelance, maybe it's just the paranoia that keeps you working. I guess maybe when I did my first cover story, that was quite exciting. So I did a cover story for Sight and Sound magazine last year, and it was sort of the longest piece of print writing that I'd gotten to do. And yeah, that was quite good.
The broader lesson from asking that question to everyone is that people don't really feel like they've arrived, but maybe invoicing has something to do with it. Okay, guys, can we all get back up on stage, and we'll see if anyone has any questions for us, and if not, whether you have any questions for each other, because that might be fun too. I can't really see people because we've got these lights in our faces. That's better. Questions from the crowd at all for either all of us or one of us or none of us here in the front?
I want to ask you guys about the interview styles in the film that we saw, and particularly the decision not to use any sync interviews, how it contributes to the film.
Sync interviews is purely technical. We did this on a really small budget. And I shot most of it, and I shoot it on a 16mm Bolex. So the sound that comes from the camera would totally interrupt their voiceover, any sync sound. So it kind of came from a technical decision, and then it was
partly stylistic because we wanted we didn't want talking heads.
Yeah, it's funny because when you do interview someone, there is quite that kind of that formal setup that I feel like is not as raw and intimate as we had kind of wanted this project to be. There was something about, I think most of the interviews were kind of done just with like us all slumped on sofas having a chat.
Well, having said that, there was that 5 minutes. I had to chisel that down from about 4 hours of interviews. Well, it doesn't sound that. It doesn't that and it's. I mean, like if anyone's made a full-length documentary, that obviously doesn't sound like a lot. But when the end product is always going to be a very short film, then was quite a task. But yeah.
And I think I saw another hand over there at the back.
Yes, but you guys again. The sound design was amazing. I felt in your film. How did you come to work with your sound designer?
That's so good that you think that.
Yeah. He's an old friend of mine, and
you actually live together.
Yeah, and
so the advice is live with your sound designer.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I've just so I suppose it's I always knew he was talented. That's actually he's a musician, but that's the first time he's done something like that. Yeah.
I guess there's a broader question there about how you find your key collaborators. When it hasn't involved living with somebody or being related to them, how have you guys... Ellie, you've produced documentaries about so many different people, and you've also collaborated with lots of different people. How do you go about finding those?
Well, I mean, it was interesting when I was listening to you two talk and sort of saying how lucky it was that you found each other. I was thinking the same thing. I'm very lucky at Falling Tree that I've been working with the same sort of executive producer for like getting on for like 8 or 9 years now. And I think it's finding people where you can have a really brutally honest relationship is the most valuable collaboration that I've had. Because there are people who will sort of like give you nice fluffy feedback, and that's very, very useful sometimes when you're feeling a little bit low. But I think the people who will tell you what you've done is a little bit shit are the people you want to hold really, really close to you. And the
That's
most valuable
totally
ones.
true. That's
Yeah.
like the person that I have a company with who was being sassy on Twitter. That's not
Brutally
someone
honest from the beginning.
Brutally honest from the very beginning, yeah. There we go.
Question for Dominic. When you have such intimate and vulnerable situation with your subjects, the question is about this other presence, which is the camera. How do you make people comfortable with the camera? Are you always honest about it being on? Have there been times where you decided to shut it off?
I think firstly, in terms of content, weirdly, I feel that I can get away with asking things and observing things more with a camera. I know that sounds really odd, an odd thing to say. In terms of making people feel comfortable, I think it's a question of time, definitely. And I don't know what you guys think, but I find the worst thing is when a contributor, is aware or thinks they're aware of what you want, so then they kind of play up to it. So if that happens, it's just kind of, I don't know, stripping it away and diverting, just talking about lots of other things and just getting them to a place where they're really comfortable. In terms of ever feeling like you should turn it off, yes, like all the time, I feel really guilty. But at the same time, I think it's like you should feel more guilty about doing a really crap job. And like the bigger picture is actually, like this scene with my grandma in the car, I had quite a few issues with that after I did it because she'd just come out of the hospital, she was really emotional. And then afterwards, she kind of had said to a few people in my family that I felt that he just was being a filmmaker and not a grandson, which is kind of true. I felt like half and half. But when she saw it a week ago, she said to me, "Oh, I'm really glad you kept that in because that's really honest." So I think as long as you can persevere and think, okay, globally it's way more important to have it, and it's like it is a really difficult moral decision. But often, I don't know, if you're going to have a moral dilemma, have it after you've done it, and then don't put it in the film. But I think if you're caught up in too much kind of moral ambiguity, whilst you're just never going to do anything, and that kind of is your job, in a way, I think, to serve something as faithfully as you can. So it's difficult, but I don't really know. You just got to have a chat with yourself, I think.
Next question.
Just talking, I think, generationally, because we're all quite young here. Some of you seem to have, and also Simran in terms of talking about forever freelance and this kind of new work modes that we're all having to participate in now. How have, because some of you either have been able to have mentorships with older filmmakers, how have you guys experienced older generations of creators talking about what they perceive your work conditions are going to be like from their perspective?
That sounds like it's for everyone, so let's start here.
I don't quite know how to answer that question, to be honest. I think I was lucky enough. My dad is a filmmaker and a photographer and kind of established himself when photojournalism was kind of at its peak in the 80s and people were actually making money off photojournalism. And I think just witnessing him as a child fully living his passion and his dream was very much formative for me to be like, actually, yeah, then I can do it. If your dad can do it, then you can do it. It was never any, he helped me realize that any boundaries I put up were in my own mind. As far as, I don't know, does anybody else have an answer for that question? I think that's the closest thing. I think it is a good question. I think, I mean, working now, sometimes I work with like significantly older cinematographers, and that's always a tricky balance as like a director with a much older cinematographer. A lot of the time I'll feel really intimidated and I won't feel confident enough to direct. We were even talking about this with older actors. I feel like I know less than them because I've been in the industry for heaps longer and I'm meant to be making creative decisions, and I find that quite intimidating. So to be honest, at the moment I'm choosing to work with like much younger people who are kind of in my generation. But that only has to do with my own insecurities, really. But yeah.
I kind of felt a sort of tension with older critics who I respect, and you know, they've been doing it a lot longer than I have, but I also feel that it kind of creates this constant feeling of feeling like you have to prove yourself more, and actually, just like you're saying, the way that we work has changed, so it might seem like things are happening more quickly, or people are able to kind of progress more quickly, but it's also harder in a lot of ways. So yeah, sometimes there is a tension, and I guess like on a practical level as well. For me, it's quite weird now. I'm doing broadsheet criticism. I have to go to screenings with other broadsheet critics, which is quite nice. But often I'm the only woman, or one of only a couple of women. Definitely the only non-white person, and the youngest usually by at least sort of 15 years. So it's kind of weird to sort of find yourself in a professional space where everybody's kind of looking at you like, why are you here? Like, you don't belong here. But
how much of that is your own insecurity, feeling like you don't belong, rather than them projecting that? I feel like a lot of times I'll assume that I don't know as much as everyone else, but they probably don't care.
I think it's probably a bit of both. Probably a bit of my own kind of wanting to legitimize myself, but also a bit of frostiness from some of the.
I mean, you're not exaggerating. I don't know how much people know about the structure of film screenings in the UK, but basically Monday to Tuesday they queue up all the films that are coming out on Friday and sort of screen them non-stop in these little Soho screening rooms. And there's a cadre of about 30, mostly dudes over 50 who are all white, kind of going from screening room to screening room, all seeing the same films in mass. And Simran's absolutely right. She would usually be the only like person of colour there.
Yeah, sometimes I think I'm the publicist, which is a bit annoying.
Intergenerational strife, or
in less kind of intergenerational. In audio, there's an interesting thing that's happening at the moment where there's a lot of chat about how kind of democratized it's become with podcasting, and which is really true to a certain extent, that it's kind of like opened it up to a lot of kind of young people and they can sort of take control of the means of production. But I think that the intergenerational frustration is often finding people in positions of power who will sit on panels like this and say, yeah, it's so easy to get in and you can make things for free. And it's like, no, you can't make things for free because time costs something and equipment costs something. And so I think, yeah, there's some sort of quite frustrating assumptions that can be made where people just sort of see something that seems to open up access but doesn't necessarily think about what that will mean for different people and how you let different kind of young people into that space.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like, the gatekeepers have definitely sort of diminished, and yes, you can make anything and anyone can make a film, but there's still that baseline thing of you need to be able to pay rent, and rent is so expensive now. I think that's the thing that's missing most of the time from a sort of older perspective, that anyone can do anything now.
Yeah, and I think it's a very kind of appealing thing to say, that it's like everything is open and we'll sort of listen to anyone who's coming to us with an idea. But I think you have to think about time and money and access. And just things like listening to all of us talk, that just feeling like you can ask for permission to talk to someone, just feeling like you can go in and be confident is different for different people, I think. Yeah.
I don't know if I would have ended up working in the media if there hadn't been a paid internship that I got onto at The Observer in the summer 2004, immediately after I graduated. And it was in London. And I'm not from London, and like the first people that I met working in the media were like when I went to London to do that internship. And I don't know if that internship had been unpaid, how I could have done it. You know, my parents couldn't have sort of put me up in London for that month. Yeah. And that internship led sort of directly into working in London from sort of pretty much that point onwards. So I think it sounds like, oh, you know, £600, that's not a lot of money, but it made all the difference to me at that point.
And it's that delicate first period, isn't it? That thing that we're talking about, the moment before the first invoice, where you're having to dedicate a month, 2 months, 6 months to like learning your craft and doing something that people are going to pay you for. And how we think about that when people are kind of breaking into the industry and financially supporting it, I think is really
I think it can seem like quite an intimidating / sort of frivolous thing to do if you're not from an arts background, to say, I'm going to go and work in the arts. Like, my parents told me a million times, are you absolutely sure about that? You don't want to be a teacher or a lawyer? Like, you've got a good degree and you want to go into film journalism, really? And I think that sort of cultural barrier of it seeming like a really unrealistic thing to want to do is really sort of easy to underestimate. I mean, you're involved with Arts Emergency, aren't you? Do you want to talk about that bit? Because that's an amazing...
Yeah, I mean, only in a very... I have nothing to do with writing, but it's this wonderful organisation that you should all join. I don't know if you've heard about it. It's run by a number of people, including a comedian, activist, Josie Long, who I work with. And it's all about opening up access and giving, they call it an alternative old boys network, so that people coming from schools who mummy and daddy don't know anyone who works at the BBC, who they can kind of set them up on an internship with, can talk to people working at The Guardian or in Film 4 and actually have these kind of conversations and have that bit of support and do, I think, the thing that's really useful, which is just that sort of demystifying process, where I remember when I looked at radio, it was just this sort of huge monolith, and I heard the Archers theme coming out on my radio and had like no concept of what even a job could be, what the different degrees of it were, and what I would need to do that, and what technical skills I would need, and like...
Because I definitely sent out some of those letters that we've been saying are a bad idea. Like, dear BBC, can I work for the media? And that's partly because if you haven't got someone in your family to say, no, actually, you need to sort of look up like what bit of that you want to do, and
And I think, you're right, for people to say, like, to give you permission to do it, I think.
So if anyone here is a bit established and maybe had time to do some mentoring, Arts Emergency is amazing. And if anyone is sort of at the other end of that journey, they are a brilliant organisation for that kind of alternative old boys network. How are we doing for time, Emily? 2 minutes. Oh my goodness. So maybe 1 or 2 questions if they're quick. Here?
I was wondering for Eleanor, I know you said that you suddenly found yourself making like a half an hour piece and you kind of got it commissioned for when you expect. When did you know that you were ready to come commission to the big names on this? Because I feel like I'm kind of stuck on not really sure where I'm going now.
Oh, how do you mean? When did I...
How did you know that you were ready to kind of suggest an idea to them?
Oh man, I really wasn't ready. I think that the important thing is asking to do things before you think you're ready to do them. Like everything useful that I have learned, I've just said like, yeah, sure, I can do this. I know how to make a radio program. And then you just find yourself somewhere with a microphone, absolutely terrified on your own. And I think, that process of learning through doing is the best thing. Like, and mistakes, the awful mistakes that get burnt into your memory forever and you see them when you close your eyes, is really key to breaking into the industry.
Awful mistakes that you see when you close your eyes that are burned into your retina forever, I think is a really nice note to end on.
Oh, that's beautiful. I'm so glad.
Thanks so much for coming, everybody, and please join me in thanking our panellists.